Good afternoon. Happy Friday. Welcome back to Great Decisions. Are some of you here for the very first time? Nope, you're all repeat offenders. That's great. As you know, my name is Tim DeRoche. I'm the Director of Programs at World Oregon. And we are beginning to wind down this series. As always, it is a fantastic partnership with Portland State University, and it's so wonderful to see such an array of community members and students and everyone sharing in ideas. It is great to keep the world safe for ideas, and that is one of the reasons why we do this program, and we've been doing this program since 1953, which sort of blows my mind when I think about it. We're doing a lot of research right now for an exhibition on our 70th anniversary, and it is really fun to find things in various archives and files. It seems when the police department used to have a red squad, we caught their attention back in 1951 for a program on the dreaded communist China. There's some great stuff in there. So stay tuned for that. That's actually going to be at the Oregon Historical Society in April through August, and there should be some great photos, some wonderful pieces of fascination like that, letters to editors claiming this, that, and the other thing. Pictures of Gerald Ford speaking in Portland in 1977. He didn't trip, so. A note on today's program, because of the sensitive nature of what is happening in India right now and the use of media and social media to both communicate and foment conflict, we are not going to live stream this at the request of our speaker. We are recording it. We hope to put it online at a later date. So stay tuned on that. But just wanted you to know, just in case you've got people sitting at home who want to see it, you will eventually be able to see it. This coming week, International Speaker Series, we have Nadia Morad, the Nobel Peace Prize winner from Iraq, who will be here on Wednesday. She was the Yazidi woman who was held captive by ISIS, and this promises to be an exceptional program. Her presence is so powerful. Her story is equally powerful, and the work she is doing on not just being a survivor of the weaponization of sex in war, but the role that she is playing in terms of looking at how nations can prevent things in other countries like this occurring in the future. She's 23, 24 years old, and one of those people that gives me hope. Also coming up, World Quest. This is our annual fundraiser. And if you've never been to World Quest, it is unlike any other fundraiser you will go to in this town. It will not be one of those boring things with rubber chicken and a bad auction. It's international trivia. And what we do is we sell tables to all of our multinational groups like Nike, Columbia Sportswear, Portland State University, Lewis and Clark. And we ask them, okay, let's see how worldly you are. Let's see how smarty pants you are. And they compete in rounds of trivia to raise money for programs like this, for our K through 12 education, for our visitor program, and everything we do throughout the year. It is an awful lot of fun. May 1st, it's May Day, so good time to bring people together and celebrate a common cause. We are also right now looking for hosts. We have in April Pan-African youth from 6 different countries coming here, and we need homestays for them. You can find information out at worldoregon.org. It is an amazing way to both be an ambassador for Oregon, but also learn about an incredible youth from another part of the world who is going to change their community when they go back there. It's on everybody's mind, coronavirus. We are working on a program for the next week and a half from now. So stay tuned for that. It will look at both the public health implications and the economic implications, being that China is Oregon's largest trading partner. So keep your eyes open. We will send something out in terms of a rapid response program, hopefully in the next day or two, and hopefully counter some of the misinformation and some of the fear that is being stoked right and left. So anyway, that brings us to today's program. Very excited to have back with us Priya Kapoor, who is a professor of international studies at PSU. Priya's research engages the multicultural moment where culture and the cultural industries generating pop culture are not simply understood in their aesthetic and consumer terms, but take into account the landscape of social justice, community mobilization, transnational turns, and a wide array of media from the commercial and mass forms to the grassroots, local, and social. So figuring into this, we have gender, race, nation, socioeconomic class. These are key things to her research and teaching. Since 2004, she has focused research on some other areas like community radio in India and South Asia. Being on the radio myself, I'm a big fan of the community radio. The confluence of regional social movements, identity, gender, global debates on the digital divide, and contemporary nationalisms have politically mobilized youth and civil society to create radio centers in rural and urban India, Nepal, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. I think in light of everything that is going on over there, how this is influencing mobilization and potential conflict in areas like Kashmir and Delhi will be interesting for us to hear about today, as well as our president's recent trip there. Throughout Professor Kapoor's teaching, she puts strong emphasis on civic engagement and the dialectic of local and global, or glocal, as I like to call it. Frequently connecting students to community-based organizations and learning gardens, homeless communities, public health facilities, women's resource centers, and community, refugee, and immigrant service organizations. Pleasure to welcome back Priya Kapoor to talk about democracy, power play, politics in India, the Citizenship Amendment Act. Give her a hand.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here and for actually coming in when it's such a bright and sunny day outside. I stand here today in solidarity with folks who are peacefully protesting and have been protesting in Delhi and other parts of the country. I've requested that this particular talk not be live streamed because it is of a sensitive nature because of the timing and not necessarily what I'm saying because I think that it's important to talk more than ever before. Just yesterday, University of Chicago had a teach-in on CAA, and there was some disturbance there as well. So it wasn't planned that I would talk today when the riots and the protests were happening simultaneously in New Delhi specifically and other parts of India. Journalists have likened this moment to the 1984 riots when Indira Gandhi was gunned down by her Sikh bodyguard because the pogrom that was unleashed upon the Sikh minority in the country was unprecedented. What we are facing today is the victimization of Muslims. But let me work back and forth in an abductive way, looking at some facts and then sort of discussing some of the more contemporary things that are happening. This talk was sort of, it had to build on its own this week. It's not something that I normally teach, but I'm definitely very keenly aware of and intimately linked with. I have literally been on the phone for 3 days with friends and family who are sort of in the front lines of a lot of the issues that are sort of unraveling in Delhi right now, and that's where I'm from, New Delhi, though I've lived in Portland for over 2 decades. So let's get started. This is sort of the timeline I will use, let's hope I keep to the timings. I'll talk a little bit about Article 370, which directly impacts Kashmir, the CAA that comes right after 370 becomes an act, Trump's visit to India, and free speech and protest, and some Q&A soon after. Like I said, I would go back and forth. Even though I want to spend the time talking about Kashmir, I think that this is an artistic rendition of sort of the relationship that the US and India have today, especially with Trump's visit. And earlier Tim talked about how my work goes back and forth from the local and global. I want to begin with this just to underscore the point that indeed there is a lot about the local which resonates globally. And this is one such aspect. So this is an iconic painting. This is what it actually looks like. The reason that Shah Jahan's images and Mumtaz Mahal's images have been invoked recently, because one of the first trips that Trump undertook was to the Taj Mahal. And there again, there are several layers of what the Taj Mahal really stands for. It stands for love, but it does stand for intolerance, hate. Shah Jahan's son, Aurangzeb, imprisoned him and killed him. And it was sort of born in a lot of turmoil in the kingdom at the time, in the Mughal Empire. So it's interesting that was sort of the symbolic portent of Trump's visit. I want to go straight away to the Constitution, the preamble of the Constitution, and here is why. This is a very important symbol of creation of modern India. This particular phrase here, sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic, was in the spirit of what was happening in 1950 when the preamble was created. However, the phrase did not enter the document until 1976, when Indira Gandhi imposed emergency in the entire country, and people lost civil rights for over a year. So this is a very symbolic and important document in the history of India. There are several who have contributed to the document. The Constitution is also one of the longest documents that India has. I'm sorry, I think it was me. It was written by hand, so even though it was modern times, it wasn't typed. It took almost 3 years to write. At its enactment, it had 395 articles, 22 parts, and 8 schedules. B.R. Ambedkar, who was known as the father, this is what it actually looked like. He's sitting right at the center. This is B.R. Ambedkar. He was the father of the Constitution, also the chief architect of actually writing it. He had several doctoral degrees, and the reason I'm talking about his credentials really is because he was also one of the few Dalit members of the committee. Dalit are the untouchables, untouchable castes, or were previously known as the untouchable caste. It is not a term that is used very much anymore, and Dalit is a more political term. And so he studied about 60 constitutions before embarking on, and he was not the only scholar on this committee. There were many others. Nehru was part of this committee. There were people of all faith. There were Christians, there were people from the Northeast, the scheduled tribes. There were people represented from the Muslim community. Maulana Azad was one such stalwart. He's sitting to the left of, it's okay. Sorry, this is his photo. The lesser known figures of the Constitution are the women, and I definitely wanted to sort of make a plug for them. There is a lot to be said here. There were 15 of them, and again, they represented different faiths. They were privileged because all of them went to school and were actually part of the freedom movement. So many of them were not unknown to social mobilization. The movement for British to quit India, known as the Quit India Movement, and the Salt March, was again, they participated in the Salt March led by Mahatma Gandhi. And so it's important to mention that Dakshyani Veludhan was again one of the Dalit members and an associate of B.R. Ambedkar, and this is her. There was also, and not picturized here, but Sarojini Naidu, who was known as the Nightingale of India, who was also a participant. There was also a woman, Amrit Kaur, Maharani Amrit Kaur, who was the daughter of the Maharaja of Kapurthala, who became later, for about 16 years, the right-hand person and secretary of Mahatma Gandhi. So she had a very intimate role in the movement itself. So these were folks who created the Constitution and meant for it to be participative, pluralistic, socialist, and secular. So given this historical context, what we are facing today makes an impression, because 370 does just the opposite of that. 370 and CAA do just the opposite of that, and we'll talk about it in just a moment. I wanted to spend more time in talking about the folks who created this Constitution, because if one learns about their lives, you really get to know how and why this Constitution was wrought in the way that it was. But I'd rather move forward and then leave more time for questions. This is, before I talk about just facts, I wanted to show a political map of India. And this is one of those whole maps that doesn't divide up Jammu and Kashmir in ways that divide it up with China and Pakistan. Because it's sort of the Indian version of Jammu and Kashmir, which is right here. So this is the disputed area, and this is Akshay Chin, which is closer to China, and this is closer to Pakistan. And so this shows the disputed lines a little bit better. Many of you are familiar with the region. It is where the Himalayan region begins, from Akshay Chin on. Oops, I'm so sorry. This is where the Himalayan region is. As it stands today, Jammu and Kashmir have become two separate union territories as a result of 370. And that is one of the first things that sort of strikes one when you see Jammu and Kashmir as a whole on the map. So what is this article? Because it was It was passed in August of 2019, just last year, at the end of summer. And almost instantly, there was protest. And there was a lot of tension. I was still there. I returned in September and got to see some of the beginnings of protest. But so 370 is a constitutional provision, however temporary. And the reason it's considered temporary is because the state of Kashmir may transform into something else, and not just because it needs to be taken out at a different time. So it is a constitutional provision that has been amended. From 1947, when Kashmir decided to join India at the time of India's partition, Kashmir decided to join India when there was attacks and fighting, and the Hindu ruler opted, even though the majority were Muslim, he opted to cede to India. So that India can maintain Kashmir so 370 was instituted so that it remains a sovereign land. So as far as jurisdiction was concerned, administrative jurisdiction is concerned, Kashmir was free to make its own laws. So legally, it was independent, except for issues of finance, defense, foreign affairs, and communications. And some of these areas of jurisdiction were exerted later, post 370, and we'll talk about that at length. In 1947, Pakistan exerted rights over Kashmir and now occupies about 30%. 10% is occupied by Aksai Chin, which was ceded to China in a war in 1962. John Kenneth Galbraith, who was a friend of Nehru, advised India not to use airstrikes, which was a weak point for China. And India did listen because of the friendship and diplomacy. And that is seen, at least by commentators, as one of the reasons why 62 was sort of won by China. So given whatever is happening today, right from the time of 1947 until today, Kashmir is seen as one of the most militarized zones, more so than Israel and Palestine. I wanted to give sort of a pictorial timeline. It's quick, it doesn't have sound, so let's see if it works.
इस नई व्यवस्था के तहत
Sorry, it does have sound.
हम सब मिलकर आतंकवाद, अलगाववाद से जम्मू कश्मीर को मुक्त कराएंगे।
So this is just a quick timeline that's visual. And I want to show a more linear timeline. And in the previous short film of 2 minutes, you can see that what we see a preponderance of is soldiers, boots on the ground, and we see statues or monumentalism that Modi has encouraged in modern India. Vallabhbhai Patel's statue is supposedly, I think, twice the size of Statue of Liberty. And that is sort of the ramparts of where Trump visited as well. And since about 1989 to 1990, we have seen a lot of military action. We have seen boys disappear. We have seen infiltration. We have seen attacks and such like. So here is a quick look. It's really partial because there are many things that can be filled up, but I think it's important to look at things to maybe try and understand some of the happenings. So 47 is really the end of British rule, and the Maharaja of Kashmir signs the treaty to accede to India. Then 50s, almost right after independence, China starts to move into Aksai Chin. It's not a livable area, but there are army formations there. And in 1962 is the war that finally leads to the capture of Aksai Chin. India still does not recognize that as Chinese territory, hence the militancy and the saber rattling goes on. From 65 to 72, there are at least 2 to 3 wars. There's 71 and 72, and then 65 is a small war. And the war in 65 is for Kashmir specifically. That is when the Security Council comes in and asks India and Pakistan to look at things more amicably through talks rather than through battle. And India promises to do that. So does Pakistan. And that is history already. So from 87 right up to the 90s, there is some really intense insurgency between the borders and on the side of India, the Indian Kashmir. Very recently, sort of fast forwarding, the BJP that comes to power in 2014 right away takes control of affairs in Kashmir, and by 2015, Mohammad Mufti Saeed is the chief minister. So usually, this is not material I teach, so I'm not programmed to say, are there any questions? But really, if you do have questions, let me know, and I'll be happy to answer. But surely we'll have a discussion, or rather, that is the lure for a professor, that we are able to discuss things that are still emerging, and I would definitely like all of you to contribute. So 370, back to 370, the article can be abrogated with the consent of the legislative body that drafted the state constitution. That body dissolved itself in 1957, so in effect it does not exist, and the Supreme Court therefore ruled in 2019, of course with the prodding of Modi, that 370 become a permanent part of the constitution. So Modi believes that the President of India has the power to revoke the article. These are his beliefs only. What has happened since Article 370? Of course, there has been a loss of autonomy and therefore a breach of faith between the people of Kashmir and the Indian government. For the region, that is legal and governmental, that is, administration is now controlled by the Modi government. There is easier targeting of Muslim populations by the army, because there is almost no control over local governance. Outside real estate interests, so this is where the commercial aspects come in, and we will talk about real estate even with respect to Trump, can purchase land in Kashmir for commercial interests. Former Chief Minister of Kashmir, that is Omar Abdullah, who is from a line of folks who have been chief ministers of Kashmir, and Mehbooba Mufti have been in custody since August 2019. It's been 6 months, and they are still in custody, and there is no reason for them to be in custody. They are not a flight risk. They are not. They're not violent in themselves, nor do they have the constituencies that can rake trouble. Also, more importantly, and for me, especially because I do study media, social media was suspended, and it still is. We'll talk of that a little bit further on. So the larger forms of violence that have happened since Article 370, that have given Modi grist for the mill to continue to have a large army presence in Kashmir. So in February 14th last year, at around this time, the Islamic militants, most likely from the camps along the border on the Pakistani side, blew up an army convoy of trucks and killed 40 in Pulwama, which is an army stronghold and also a village. So Pakistan, when India was trying to cross the border through a helicopter, an Indian pilot was captured by the Pakistanis, and he was returned, and that was seen as sort of a fig leaf, and there was some calm after that. It was sort of an event that had a lot of pomp and show. The newspapers on both sides covered it, politicians talked about it endlessly, etc. India claimed that the person was in good health. Pakistan claimed that he wasn't doing so well, and so he was sent home. And there was all kinds of conversation that happened with that. So the Citizen Amendment Act comes right after the autonomy of Kashmir is at stake in December. It was passed by the Supreme Court one day after the bill was passed in Parliament. So on 12th to 13th December, the bill becomes an act. It amended the Citizenship Act of 1955, providing a path to Indian citizenship for illegal migrants of Hindu, Sikh, Buddhist, Jain, Parsi, and Christian religious minorities who had fled persecution from Pakistan, Bangladesh, Afghanistan. So what you can see is the one religious category that is missing from this long list of faith is Muslim. And they were not given that eligibility in the bill that was passed on the 13th of December. Now, that has created terrible unrest. And that is why I spent so much time on the preamble, on telling you who some of the constituents of the assembly were, and talking a little bit about the formation of that constitution. So not only is there a constitutional breach as we see it, but there is a lot else that has happened. There has been a sort of changing of history. The conditions in which India was left by the British was dismal. And the only way it was brought together were by these documents that were ideal. So these were ideal documents. They were sort of the moral basis. And I would take the leap and say moral basis, because that really did become the ethical code from which the governments subsequently were formed. And so we are slowly eroding into that terrain. The amendment has been widely criticized as discriminating on the basis of religion, in particular excluding Muslims, as we spoke about earlier. This phrase is very key, religious persecution. Religious persecution or fear of religious persecution, because that becomes the basis of entry into Indian territory from neighboring countries, specifically Bangladesh, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. And I'll tell you that in just a minute, why that is so. So the UNHCR, the Commission for Human Rights, called it fundamentally discriminatory, so we already have a reaction from UN bodies, adding that while India's goal of protecting persecuted groups is welcome, this should be accomplished through a non-discriminatory, robust national asylum system. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about the asylum system too, or the lack thereof. There is no asylum. That is a very big hole in refugee law. And today there are civil society groups who are addressing that. Because right from citizenship, you either get refugee status or not, and that becomes a stepping stone into citizenship. So there must be an intervening stage, which is asylum, or you may opt to be an asylee before you decide if you're going to go back to your country or gain citizenship in the country, the host country that you are in. And that big hole has been really manipulated by the Modi government. So critics express concern that the bill would be used along with the National Register of Citizens, which we will talk about. There are these boom, 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 one after the other, laws and acts and bills that were passed by Modi, which have a meaning other than what they seem to be. And this is one of them. Has a slide all of its own, so it's important. Some states have announced that they will not implement the act, just in the same way that when refugees were denied entry here in the US, or at least Trump made the declaration that the US will now not accept refugees for a certain time, for a certain period, and will reduce the number by half, and as is, the number is fairly small. In the same way, the state governments said, we do not accept the provisions of this act and will not listen to it. Later, of course, Amit Shah, who is the right hand of Modi, has said that is not a legal basis upon which states can stand. And I don't know what gives him the knowledge that it is not, that states don't have legal authority, because they have already explored that area and then declared that indeed they can create these provisions because it's part of state law or state jurisdiction. So critics question the exclusion, of course, of other regions that might not be evident, and with which India has had long-standing history and relationships. In 1959, the Dalai Lama came to India to set up his government in Dharamshala. So those sacred relationships will be shaken with the CAA if it goes further than it has. And that is precisely the point as far as the Modi government is concerned. The whole, and I think the word that I haven't mentioned here is Hindutva, or Hindu nationalism, which is the main credo of the Modi government. So, given that, Sri Lanka has had, again, a love-hate relationship with India. the Tamil minority have gained refugee status automatically since the troubles began. Myanmar also, a former president of India married as a diplomat in Burma, married his wife from Burma, and so there have been just many very fruitful relationships between India and Myanmar. And Myanmar is the military regime's name for Burma, and Burma is sort of their own assumed name. So, okay, so this is, I think I pointed out religious persecution and what meaning that has for the Modi government. The argument, the counter argument that the Modi government is giving for instituting CAA and excluding Muslims is that if the state religion of these particular countries, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Afghanistan, is Islam, then it would be really bold to assume that Muslims are being persecuted. So they are saying it doesn't make sense to give Muslims refugee status because they're coming from countries that are Islamic. So now, what reality is very different. There are many groups within Islamic communities, such as the Hazaras in Afghanistan, the Rohingyas in Myanmar, the Ahmadiyyas in Pakistan, who have traditionally been persecuted for generations. So the passage of bill, as you can imagine, has created mass-scale protest. I just want us to watch this YouTube video of a young man whose poetry, and again, I'm talking about human rights, globalization. Roger Waters of Pink Floyd, who was speaking at a rally in London, meets this young man and decides to translate his poetry that he wrote at the height of the CAA protests in order to speak at the rally. So let me show what the words are, and then I'll go back to the short video. And I may not show all of it because it's 4 minutes. I'll maybe show like a minute just to show you who the person is. I think we need to know the actors and their humanity before we really try and understand what a major change CAA has been for the country and for governance. This is a shorter version of what Waters has translated and transliterated. Kill us, we will become ghosts and write of your killings with all the evidence. You write jokes in court. We will write justice on the walls. We will speak so loudly that even the deaf will hear. And towards the end, he writes, everything will be remembered, because it's about remembering. Everything recorded. And he says we will write revolution in the sky. So these are really sort of profound words for those who have seen, the generation that has seen violence at the hands of the police. And we've seen a very interesting dynamic emerge where the police have been completely unhinged. And we'll talk a little bit about what's going on with political parties. But let me get to this first. This is in the train station in New Delhi.
सब याद रखा जाएगा, सब याद रखा जाएगा, सब कुछ याद रखा जाएगा। तुम्हारी लाठियों और गोलियों से जो कत्ल हुए हैं मेरे यार सब, तुम्हारी लाठियों और गोलियों से जो कत्ल हुए हैं मेरे यार सब, उनकी याद में दिलों को बर्बाद रखा जाएगा, सब याद रखा जाएगा, सब कुछ याद रखा जाएगा। और तुम स्याहियों से झूठ लिखोगे हमें मालूम है, तुम स्याहियों से झूठ लिखोगे, हमें मालूम है, हो हमारे खून से ही हो सही, सच जरूर लिखा जाएगा, सब याद रखा जाएगा, सब कुछ याद रखा जाएगा। मोबाइल इंटरनेट टेलीफोन भरी दोपहर में बंद करके, मोबाइल टेलीफोन इंटरनेट भरी दोपहर में बंद करके, सर्द अंधेरी रात में पूरे शहर को नजर बंद करके, हथौड़ियां लेकर दफतन मेरे घर में घुस आए। मेरा सर बदन मेरी मुख्तसर सी जिंदगी को तोड़ जाना, मेरे लखते जिगर को बीच चौराहे पे मारकर, मेरे लखते जिगर को बीच चौराहे पे मारकर, यूं बेअंदाज होकर तुम्हारा झुंड में खड़े होकर मुस्कुराना, सब याद रखा जाएगा, सब कुछ याद रखा जाएगा। और
So this is a very passionate young man who has become one of the newer heroes of the CAA protests. I want to keep going because we are running out of time for questions as well. So there are two corollary acts which dovetail into CAA, which is NRC and NPR, and what they are is a registry. And it was tried in just one state, and it has been disastrous. The Muslims who are bordering Bangladesh moved and have lived in Assam, a northeastern state, for generations, have been interned and have been, some of them, incarcerated. So the registry yielded a real shortfall. Of the 33 million who are in the state, only 31 were accounted for. So one of the things that CAA and the registries have done is that they have not allowed people to really present papers, and in most cases people don't have papers because they've lived for generations and have never had to prove their so I just want to read. The purpose is to intern people and to deport them. And this is after they have lived here for generations. I mean, there is a resonance of this in the immigration debates here. And so again, if you look at the local and global, you can see how that initial image of Noor Jahan and Shah Jahan, Mumtaz Mahal and Shah Jahan in embrace, signifying Trump and Modi, is not far from the truth. So the National Population Register, here again, it usually was created so that there would be an accounting of people, but it had never been used so that people would be sent back somewhere. So there had been a real benign policy of accepting refugees from the three countries that have been named, specifically as India not accepting further more Muslims than they have already. But today the entire policy changes. So this is just the number of people who received Trump. It's fabled that there are 100,000. Some reports have said a figure higher than that, 125,000, but it's definitely not 7 million. Which I wanted to spend some time on attack of free speech. What we saw in after 370 and CAA was the complete suspension of social media, because that is the one way that speed is moderated, the ways in which information gets from point A to point B. So there have been some of the longest blackouts in any democracy globally, and that is noteworthy in a country like India that has always enjoyed free press. And one of the ways in which the independence movement got an impetus during the time of the British rule was through the newspapers and leaflets, one of which Gandhi himself wrote in. So this is sort of a very dark hour of democracy in India. And I think we need to talk about it more than ever before. So I can't say enough about it. I do want to show you different videos, but we don't have time. So I'm going to just quickly go through the slides and stop and see if there are other things that the audience would like to contribute. They don't have to be questions, but they can be comments as well. So this was a sort of anomalous news item I pulled out, where a person has, you know how accepting India is of deities. We have as many deities as there are people. And so Trump is a new deity for one of the villagers. And he says that he worships him every day. So take him for what it is. Again, I think there has been just severe misinformation. I've been literally glued to media for the past week. And these are some of the more reliable internet sources, so I thought I'd put it out there just for the sake of it, if people are keen to follow up. And there is a friend who teaches at Northwestern Chicago, who translated, again, a poem that's not simply a poem, it's actually a treatise of CAA, and it's also a treatise on identity. The title of I won't show you the poem just because we don't have time, but the title is Indian Musalman. So the two elements of the title are not opposed to each other. So Indian is not being Hindu. A Musalman is as much, or Muslim, is as much an Indian as a Hindu is. And so that's sort of the essence of the poem, and I wanted to end at that. Thank you.
And not to sound like an expert who's going to muzzle the expert, but we actually do want questions and not comments because we don't have a lot of time. So having a quick question is very, very important. I'm actually going to ask the first question, and then we can go from there. We had a program a couple weeks ago on data and artificial intelligence, and one of the things that came up was India's national biometric ID program, which was overturned. Mm-hmm. Does that amendment sort of replace the surveilling and sorting?
Yes. So NPR, which is the national registry, dovetails into the Aadhaar card, which is the biometrics, and there is no saying what, and so the registry is not like the census. You have to give everything. You have to give data. You have to give each and every document that you have, where you live, generations back, which most Indians do have knowledge of through our funerary rites. So yes, people are foreshadowing a greater surveillance of the government with their biometric data. So definitely, that's an excellent question. I didn't quite get to that part, but the ways in which the three converge is very important.
The media that you put up there, I only got 2 down, but could you put that back up again for the media?
The media.
Which one do you think, which are the 2 that you think are maybe the best?
Okay. I like The Wire. So thewire.com, it's really simple. And the Quint, I like these 2 very much. Every now and then, scroll.in. Actually, all have contributed to my knowledge of what is actually going on the ground. The people I speak to are very emotional at this time. I even have cousins whose children are doing what is considered board exams. So these are passing exams for 10th and 12th grade. So of course there is very high tension and high emotion right now in the family as well as in the larger community. And I know since I was a journalist before I came to the US, the journalist community is just beside themselves. They don't know what's going on. How did Shaheen Bagh, which is the most peaceful protest, it's sort of like the Occupy movement of India, was turned into rioting the 2 days that Trump arrived in India. So the parallelism or the parallel events of that entire episode are sort of staggering. Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm confused about what the end game for the BJP and Prime Minister is. I mean, you can't expel a few hundred million people, and you can't expect that if they're consigned to second-class status, that it's not going to provoke a civil war. So I'm not sure where this is going to go besides just chaos.
Yeah. I mean, that's precisely what it is. I think what it creates is a fear and an unrest among Muslim populations, and many of whom are disenfranchised and poor. And if they are refugees coming in from places like Bangladesh and Afghanistan, they as is are disenfranchised and without support. So what we are seeing right now is unrest. And that's what we are seeing, and nothing else. So the end game is again to further the ideology of Hindutva, of India as a Hindu nation, which it has never been. So it's really recreating something that from nothing, So yeah, thank you for asking that question.
So may I ask,
Yeah.
how would you describe the demographics of the protesters? Politically, religiously?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. So no one has formally counted, but I have friends and family who were there. They were present there. And so these protests are not all Muslim. There are children, there are women, they are of all faith. So it's a very interesting demographic. However, the rioting when it began in the Muslim areas. So there was specific targeting of Muslims because they couldn't tell from Shaheen Bagh protests who the Muslims were and who the Hindus were. So they went specifically to the communities and started to create violent sort of noises. Yeah. Thanks.
Actually, just sort of a follow-up on that question in terms of, can you just comment on how the divisions in the society reflect an urban-rural divide, and if there's regional, if there's a California of India that might be, opposing implementation, that kind of thing?
There is a rural-urban divide, but it hasn't figured as much in the protests currently, or at least it hasn't come to light. So Delhi is a very key player in this whole thing because 2 weeks ago, Delhi defeated the BJP party. The Delhi government defeated the BJP, which is the ruling party, the Bharatiya Janata Party, of which Modi is the head. And they elected what is known as AAP, the Aam Aadmi Party, which means every person's party. And so it is alleged that because there was this recent win, in order to, under the cover of the Trumpian happiness, they would completely ruin it for Kejriwal, who is the head of the Aam Aadmi Party. And so a lot of the protests and rioting have centered on urban areas, and specifically New Delhi. But the momentum was earlier begun by several student groups in universities. First in New Delhi, Jawaharlal Nehru University, which is a graduate-only place and known for radical work, so it is a California of sorts. And then other parts of India as well. So even places like Bijnor and Hyderabad and Bangalore, all of them have seen significant student protest activity as well.
Yes, you didn't really talk much about the Modi government effort against so-called black money.
Yes.
And how that relates to their payment system and the register, and how that progress in reforming the economy has been very important.
Yes.
And to some degree goes contrary to what you've talked about.
How so? I want to know. How does it go contrary to what you're
Well, it's required identification of bad actors. It's not necessarily related to religious beliefs.
Yeah.
And it's had, I think, from my impression, a very positive impact on the Indian economy.
Yeah, the economists have had different things to say. If the quest to end black money was sort of, it was quite a disaster, really, because a lot of the black money was not in the 10 and 20 rupee notes, 100 and 200 rupee notes. It was really elsewhere. And so the rigorous destabilization of small household economy at the time was really deleterious to the Indian everyday workings of economics. But that doesn't have a direct relationship to NRC, but I'm sure given time, there are going to be ways in which we can connect them. Because obviously the political economy is not, the whole political economy is connected, but it didn't make a dent in black money. The idea, or it was purported to get rid of black money and the stashes that people had that they had not paid taxes on. But that was really small change, and just created a lot of problems for people, for the common person, yeah.
Okay, we are out of time. Give Priya Kapoor a big hand.
Thank you for having me.
And to quote the great poet laureate Carol Burnett, as usual, I'm so glad we've had this time together. We will see you next week. Grab a little hand flyer for World Quest on your way out if they're still on the table. And thank you.